I want to talk tonight about, I don't believe I've ever talked on this topic. You might want to get up and run, but the camp's nearly over. But I hope you stay to the bitter end. I want to talk about prayer dreams. Praying the easy, relaxed, effortless way. And in doing that, I'm just going to go back to where the thing got started in my life. Way back in 1929. All my life I had been in the underworld and in penal institutions of the United States and had never taken any advantage of anything that society has to offer. And so I didn't have very much to go on. I knew that on the 2nd of March I would be leaving there. I went to my old friend, the lifer, and told him that I was totally unequipped and unprepared from a social point of view, a society point of view, to go out into the world. That I had never worked at anything, and I had no trade, no skill. I'd hardly ever earned an honest dollar in my life, and I didn't know the customs of society. I didn't know anything about its rules, so I wasn't equipped. And I went to him for counsel, and he told me to make a list of the things that I wanted to do and make it big. Take off all limitation. Remove the ceiling from the sky. And make a list and have it ready and committed to memory on the last day of January, or last day of December. And in that pregnant moment, between the passing of an old year and the beginning of a new, to drop that whole business into the lap of God, right at that moment. So I made a list, and I've jotted down some of them. I had a very long list. Be too long to share here, for he told me not to use any limitation. And he said, you're to dream these dreams. You're not to be tense. You're not to strain at it. And you are to take the attitude that it doesn't make a particle of difference whether anything ever happens of it or not. Desire it, dream it, and release it. That was what he told me. So I put down on the list some impossible things. The first one I put down there was that I wanted to write for publication. The second was that I wanted to speak in public. The third was that since I didn't have a friend in the outside world anywhere, I wanted some friends. And the third was that I wanted to help prisoners release themselves from the bondages of crime. And then I wanted to help people. In other words, I wanted to go into the helping business. Always, all my life, I had never helped anybody. And I wanted to try that for a change. And then I wanted to get married. And then I wanted a home. And finally I wanted just an endless library of innumerable books. I was crazy for books. For I'd just begun to learn to read laboriously. I had read the pulp paper fiction and the crime news all my life, and I had just gotten a hold of Crime and Punishment, almost like a miracle. By Dostoevsky, and I would read that sometimes only a half a page in a whole night. And after I had finished with that, again, almost like a miracle, there fell into my hands the story of an African farm boy. And oh, how I did revel in that. Then a very strange book came to me. We draw things to us when we get hungry for it. A book called The 25th Man. And I just thought I never would get enough of reading that. Then one volume of a 6-set volume of the Encyclopedia of English Literature. And I discovered the poets and the great writers of England. I was just simply hungry for books, and I put down on that list, I want hundreds of books. Well, all these things were impossible. And the day before I was to be released, a very brilliant, cynical man who worked in the Bureau of Identification in the prison, a university man, very agnostic, if not atheistic, and unusually brilliant, and he could explode almost anything. He could make the Bible look like 20 cents worth of hamburger when he'd get through with it. He knew it from cover to cover. And all of his knowledge about it was used to destroy the faith in young prison inmates. He came over to the hospital where I was working that afternoon, and I sat down and shared my list with him. He sat there almost paralyzed listening to such foolishness. Why, I said, write for publication, you don't even know how to spell. Never gone to school, you didn't even get through the 5th grade. You know anything about punctuating a sentence, you wouldn't know how to do anything. How could you write for publication? Well, I said, that's my dream. And I got to that public speaking, and he did snort. And what'll you tell them? Will you tell them about being a bum all your life, drunk a year in Chicago, and stood up for Jesus and the rescue mission in Philadelphia for toast and coffee? How you cracked a safe in Indiana and escaped from a chain gang in South Carolina? Who'd want to hear that? I said, I don't know. Just a dream of mine. And when it came to friends, he said, you haven't a friend in the world, never will have one. Said, you'll go out of here and you'll have no friends and you can't get a job, even if you wanted one. Every place you apply for a job, they'll stick an application blank under your nose, and you'll come to a clause in it, have you ever been convicted of a crime? That'll be the end of it. And you'll get hungry and your burlap suit will curl up to your knees. That hat of yours, which is out of this world, will be a curiosity piece. And those shoes that have never been anywhere seen on the public streets except on the feet of a convict. And you'll get hungry, and then you won't beg. Your pride will keep you from that, and you'll steal, and you'll be back. Oh, he was a help. And he said, as far as helping prisoners, what prisoners want to be helped? They don't want to be helped. There's no one in here wants any help. And how are you going to help people? And who would marry you? I don't know. Who would have you? Well, I don't know of anyone. He said there have been all kinds of women marry ex-convicts, and they've regretted it. I think you would be committing a worse crime you've ever committed to marry anyone and put her through the ordeal of being married to an ex-convict. And home, it would bore you to death. That was his attitude toward the whole dreaming business. But all those dreams have come true. I didn't know how to speak. I didn't know how to write anything for publication. I didn't know how to gain friends, get any friends. I certainly didn't know how to help prisoners or anybody else. And marriage was certainly a mystery. All my life I'd lived in a sardonic, cynical, womanless world where there wasn't a bit of humor, cold, no decency anywhere, no refinement anywhere, no culture anywhere, just dull, dead, drab, degradation, no women. And that would be something to enter into marriage on that basis. I wonder what a woman would think. How could she take on such a thing? But she did, I can say this, that it had not been for my wife, spiritually I would have gone dry years ago. I know that. She has kept that, whatever stream there is, flowing. And she's my most severe critic. If I have achieved anything in the realm of writing, it's been because of her intuitive capacity to discern what ought to be said and how it ought to be said. I don't like it a bit. Because now I become very arrogant about my writing. I lose all sense of humility. And when anybody criticizes it, I don't like it. And especially when she criticizes it. I tell her forthwith and promptly that you're not a writer. What do you know about this? And I'm inclined to argue about it, and then quietly go back to the typewriter and do it over. I've learned that intuition is right down the beam. I don't have much of it. She supplies it. And I've learned to listen to it. And so far, when I have failed to listen to it, I have found the stuff that I put in blue penciled by an editor canceled out. And the way she has figured that it ought to be said has been accepted. I don't think we even begin to know the power that is in the intuition of women. Some men have it and some don't. Once in a while I get a little insight, but most of my insights come through our morning devotion together. For the past 6 months we've been reading the Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. And she reads and I listen. And insights come. And we discuss. And then we meditate and we pray. And it's amazing the things that she says. Brand new original insights. So it is true that if it had not been for her, my spiritual streams would have long since gone dry. Husbands ought to be very grateful for their wives. Not only that, but they ought to get rid of their reservations and pray with them. I know it's hard for a man to pray with his wife because she knows him so well. It's mighty hard to know each other when in the morning before you've had coffee. Still got your old sloppy bedroom slippers on, your bathrobe slopping around. Pretty hard to pray together before you've made your toilet. But I believe husbands ought to pray with their wives and pray out loud as well as silently. And I'm quite sure they'll be greatly rewarded. Now he said, you commit all these dreams to your memory, and you build up as great a desire for them as you possibly can. And then he said you turn them all over to God, drop them, and you make up your mind to make Christ Jesus central in your life. And you do your level best from here on out to imitate him. He said, read the Bible, but don't waste one single minute on any controversial phrase or sentence. Anything that's confusing and vague and controversial, pass it by as though it were nothing. Never argue with anybody about theology or religion. Never give yourself any time whatever to get interested in discussing the mysteries of God. Stay away from groups that never rise above a discussion group. But if you can find anybody to pray with, pray with. He said these discussion groups tickle the intellect. That's the best they do. If you can combine them with prayer, they're marvelous. If they stay on the discussion level, they become dead. He said the great doctrines of the church you will not understand. Pass them up. Don't bother with the rituals and the ceremonies and the rites and the forms of godliness and all these things until you understand them. If baptism is a mystery to you, don't bother with it. Just wait till you do know about it. By the way, he made a comment on infant baptism that I later found confirmed in Paul Richard's book, The Scourge of Christ. He said that in the olden days, the saints baptized sinners. Now sinners baptize the innocent. There'll be a lot of things about baptism that you'll not understand. Water baptism. By and by you will understand it. And when you understand it and know what it's all about, that it's more than a mere church ritual, that it's spiritual and mystical, then find a minister who is a mystic and who knows more about it than its mere ceremonial form, and go to him and have him baptize you. Immerse you, clear up. He said, don't waste your time. Just keep trying to imitate Jesus and follow him, and you will fail miserably every day. Over and over, day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, you'll fail. But he said all great success is achieved only by failing. No one ever succeeds greatly except through failure. It's a trial and error process. Now I had received from the indwelling Christ the release from the negative criminal life. And now he wanted me to imitate the historical Jesus to the best of my ability. And by doing that, I paid no attention to these things that I had on my list, a few of which I put down here. But I simply centralized in the historical Jesus, and particularly in the Sermon on the Mount. And I attempted to apply those things. And as this attempt was made from day to day, all these things began to fall into line. I discovered that I was writing for publication, and that I had helpers in editorial offices who knew all about composition, who knew all about writing, grammar, rhetoric, and they helped me. They were willing for me to send in my thoughts in the best form that I could, and they would help me put it together, and they're still doing it. I still don't know how. But when I get quiet, I have a notebook, and things begin to come through. I just get them down as fast as I can, just in any form and shape that I can, and by put them together the best that I can and send them off. And I have found great kindness among these publishers. Some of the finest friends I have are publishers of these books, magazines. They will even go to the expense of having me come to them and talk to me about what they'd like to have and how I might be able to do it and how they can help. My English publisher has even offered to pay him away over there to England to work on a book for him, which I didn't go over, but I did the book, and he's got it now. It'll be out in the fall, on the Sermon on the Mount. But they're very kind, wonderfully kind, and helpful. and speaking in public. I didn't know how to do it then. I don't know how to do it now, but I'm doing it. How anybody puts up with it, I don't know. It's a mystery. I don't even try to fathom it. I can't understand it. But I just know that they do. And friends, I didn't have a single one. My father had died, and he was really the only friend I had on earth. He stayed with me to the end. He came to the jail where I was being held before going to prison the last time. Just a few days before, he had been to the prison to receive me on my release. And he took me home and talked to me about my mother, who had died at my birth, bed fever. They didn't have any pastors in those days. And he was trying to tell me, he was trying to persuade me to change my life. But you don't change your life from the outside. It's an inside job. You don't command the change. It's done from within. You don't put new wine in an old bottle. And you don't patch on new patches on an old garment. When the change comes, it's got to be out of one Adam into a new Adam. But Father was trying to persuade me. He was appealing to some dead angel, I guess, in my system. He had been called to the ministry when he was 17 in the conversion experience in the Methodist Church and had rejected the call and instead had gone into business. He had finally given up his own personal prayer life, his devotional life. And as he gave that up, he gave up the Bible and went into reading the modern literature of Huxley and Darwin, Haeckel, Brand, and others like that. And he had a feeling that because he had rejected the call to the ministry, that might have been the reason why I went wrong. I let him think it and believe it. That tickled my corrupted ego. And so he talked. And we got home and went to the little town of my birth. And there where my sister lived with her little children, about 350 souls lived there. I was caught red-handed burglarizing the general store. The most cheap and tawdry crime I'd ever committed. I was right back in jail again, and Father was there to see me the next morning, as soon as he found it out. And he had aged about 10 years, I guess, a few hours. This was the last blow. This was the final disappointment that he could take. But he had never condemned me. He'd never criticized me. He'd always loved me in a human way. He had spent a very sizable fortune trying to keep me out of trouble. He would go anywhere that I wanted him to go and use any means that he could to spend money to hire shyster lawyers and fix things up and get me off whenever he could. And so he was there, and this was the final blow. And he stood there at the bars, and he was all broken down. His shoulders were crushed in, and his chest looked like it was crushed. And his face was a mask of suffering. I can see that face very vividly I can see him standing there, and I often do, with my eyes wide open. I can see Father standing there with his hands through the bars holding my hands and his head down, and I am absolutely unresponsive to this suffering. My soul is dead. His hands are hot. His face is this mask. And the eyes, Father had wonderful eyes, but now they were glazed with pain. And he just stood there, unable to trust his voice to speak. He just stood there, practically died. Later on, after I had my own crucifixion and resurrection from the dead, I knew that I had crucified my Father. I did it that day. He went through that brief program of entering a plea of guilty in the court. And the courtroom was crowded with people. And they came there to scrutinize him, and to me it was the most vulgar display I believe I'd ever seen of people, curious people, coming to scrutinize a man who had been crucified. He took it, finally went to the depot when I was chained to the sheriff. And at the station he said, "I won't see you anymore. I'm going to be with your mother. And we'll pray that someday we'll see you over there." I could only feel a sneer and a sense of contempt and also pity. For I couldn't imagine a man who had had the advantages that he had had as an educated man. I couldn't imagine anyone with intelligence of this kind talking vaguely about some nebulous, remote over there, as if Mother was over there and that he was going over there. To me, when you were dead, just like a horse. And that's all there was to it. And I just felt a sense of revulsion and a kind of a pity that I would be disillusioned in him in this way. Well, he went almost immediately to the hospital. It was a broken heart. He had had a stout heart, but it could stand up only so long. The blows I gave it were the blows of a pile driver, not just a sledgehammer. They were pile driver blows. And I know that you can break another person's heart. I know it. If you just keep hammering at it long enough, you can break it. And that's what I did. And he went to the hospital. He had no will to live. And he called for a calendar. It was hanging on the wall, and with a stub of a pencil, he wrote out his obituary remarks for his lodge and his funeral remarks. And then he wrote a final little love letter to me. I have that old piece of calendar. It's brittle now, even under glass. Yellow with age, but I can still make out the words. He didn't finish it. He died in the process of composition. That's the kind of a father he was. And I know that he was close to Jesus. even though he had not accepted his call to the ministry. And I know that no man can go through life with the kind of faith that he had in me and hope and live that long without any condemnation or any judgment or criticism. In spite of anything that I did, he'd never criticize, he'd never judge. He knew that judgment belonged to God, and he didn't assume to take over any of the prerogatives of God. And so he just simply remained on a plane of human love and loved me with everything that he had on that plane. And every bit of it was rejected by me. Not only rejected, but abused and taken advantage of. There was never a sincere motive in my heart or soul for anything that he ever did. It was always expedience, and everything that he did I exploited. Now that after he had gone, and I'd had my experience, his crucifixion, almost physical death, I realized a lot of things. And one of the things was that he was able to help me after he left this world, but not before. And I firmly believe that our dear ones are best able to help us after they're on the other side. That is, we're stubborn. I think his help came from above. I wouldn't be surprised that Jesus came up to him and said, "John, you've had a long, hard row to hoe with that boy. Now I'll go down and release him. I'll answer your prayer." Well, that's imagination, of course. But it could be true, because it was not long after he had passed on that this release came. And that preceded this getting ready or prepared to go out into the world and into a world that I knew absolutely nothing about. The social world was as foreign to me as a foreign country. I didn't know one single thing about it. I'd never lived in it. I had to go out of prison where every creature need was supplied, where there wasn't one single obligation, where the state paid everything, where there was nothing to sign, nothing to contribute to, nothing to buy. Didn't even have to pay the barber. You had no taxes to pay. You had no responsibilities whatever. And I had to go out with all that security there into this social world where all these responsibilities and obligations would be heaped upon me. Well, that was certainly something. And I had this list. I call these dreams prayers. Later on, when I met Glenn Clark, the thing that attracted me to him more than anything else was his principle of relinquishment. I'd use the word release, but relinquishment is better, stronger. And his theory was, desire things with all your heart, and then relinquish them to God. Let them go. Desire them, but relinquish them. And that's what these dreams were. I just put them down and then released them, relinquished them. And one by one, they came into manifestation when I didn't even know it. wonderful friends have come. Friends among the spiritual leaders of the world. Friends among the great preachers of the world. Friends among the great educators of the world. Artists, musicians, writers. In all departments of life, politicians, statesmen, I've found friends. And I haven't even sought them, they've just come. They've just been drawn into my orbit of experience. And I wanted to help prisoners. And being an ex-convict, I knew the prison doors were locked against me. But I have spoken in, I imagine, in most of the prisons of the United States. Wardens all over the country have accepted me. I know many, many prison chaplains have spoken and ministered in prisons everywhere in this country. And I'm quite sure that God has blessed me in bringing many and many of these prisoners to release through the great releaser, Christ Jesus himself. This has all come. I've never asked for it. I've never asked one single prison official for an invitation, for an appointment to speak. I've never asked anybody for an appointment to speak in public. I don't seek appointments. I only respond to invitations. Because these things come naturally. Then if you interfere with them with your puny plans and try to arrange it yourself, it won't work. And I met my wife, and we were married. I put her down on a piece of paper before I met her. I didn't want a yes woman. I wanted a no woman. I believe there's some power in the agreement of similars. But I believe there's a great deal more power in the agreement of opposites. Out there in Hollywood, all those big bugs in the movies have yes men around them. Everything they plan, they get these yes men around to say yes. And that tickles their vanity. But they don't have any power. So I put down on a piece of paper what my wife ought to be. I didn't know where she was on earth. I first found out my weak spots, and then I put hers on the other side, the strong places, strong points. And my strong points, her weak points, and when we wound up, we were just the opposite. Well, we haven't always agreed under those circumstances. But there's one point where we can agree, and that's up here. All these things down below here we may disagree on. But up here in the spiritual world we have perfect agreement. And whenever two opposites can cross-fertilize each other with their ideas, their insights, and their revelations, and then when they can't come to an agreement about it, and they come up here and agree up here in the spiritual, then all these things below that they're disagreeing in become fuel. That helps to bring about into manifestation the things they have both wanted but disagreed on. That's a wonderful thing about that. Don't say yes all the time, say no once in a while. And I think that wives ought to explode occasionally. I think if the husband comes in and throws his coat here and his hat over there and the shoes out there, and the kids come in and throw the towels all over the bathroom floor, leave the soap in the tub, I think that she ought to explode, clear the air once in a while. It'll only last about 3 or 4 days. Explode again. Then I put down on the list, and I'm just going to run over these briefly. We're going to broadcast. I put these dreams down on the list. I wanted knowledge of the grace of God. I had experienced it, but didn't know a thing about it. And that grace of God is the most important thing in the spiritual world. And I wanted to understand the redemptive love. And I've discovered that the more you understand of it, the less you know. Our greatest concepts of the redemptive love are absolutely as nothing to what redemptive love really is. And I wanted release from doubt. I didn't want to be tormented with doubts entering in to my experience. And I wanted to master the ability to get still. Deep silence. I wanted a silence so deep that the body and all of the senses would be in abeyance. I wanted to practice that and have the capacity and the energy and the drive to do it until I had achieved it. Then I wanted to master the art of mental prayer or meditation. I put that down. And finally, I wanted to achieve as much as possible a complete lack of effort in spiritual things, with the hope that eventually I might get to the place where I just simply would have no effort left at all. Make no effort. And those things are still in the process of unfolding. These other mundane things have been achieved, these dreams, and a lot more with them. But these down here, knowledge of grace, more knowledge about grace, more understanding about the redemptive love, more release from doubt. Doubts come, doubts come. Sometimes there are dark nights of the soul when nothing but doubt exists for a week, 10 days, or 2 weeks at a time. Just doubt. Unable to read the scriptures, unable to read anything, unable to pray, unable to think. These are dark nights of the soul, and they come and they're created out of doubt. That is still in the process of unfolding, and silence, I have done quite a bit on that, but not nearly enough. Not nearly enough. Meditation, I have done quite a bit on that, but again, not nearly enough. I know that I need to master this art far more than I've ever been able to. And just this past year, I have discovered that I am coming more and more into an effortless process of seeking God. That it's becoming more easy, less strain, less struggle in it. It's really approaching, I think, an area where a person can really let go and let God. Now you see that even in this dream state, these things are just like prayers. You dream them, you get them into your memory, and then you release them and centralize in Jesus and try to follow him and attempt to imitate him and fail and try again. And somehow or other, these things all come into being. I am a hungry person for books. I think the printing press is the greatest invention ever made. And I have books from the wall. I wanted them from the floor to the ceiling, and I have them. And they just keep coming. Can't get enough books. Great, finest religious books and spiritual books and mystical books are there to be browsed in and studied and read, enjoyed. We go out here and we broadcast and we think this is just a dream. Some might think it's just imagination, that it's just a fantasy, that it's some kind of an expression of magic. It isn't. It's as real as anything in the world. When you go out there to broadcast, you send out these redemptive beams on the vocal plane, and the scientists tell us that you can't send out a single word that will not remain right in the atmospheric plane, in the realm of voice. There's a plane just above it, the telepathic, and when you're praying silently, you're up there sending out these thoughts. And these good thoughts that are going out are redeeming evil thoughts in the world. And if it were not for the prayers going up and silently sent forth, this earth plane would long ago become completely destroyed by evil. But every redemptive thought that goes out, every evil thought it touches, it redeems it. It just keeps going around and around, around and around. And that is why the importance of prayer groups and vocal prayer and silent prayer. So when we pray for these leaders tonight, even if the leaders are not affected, we're putting forth into the atmosphere redemptive thought forms that will never stop redeeming unredemptive thought forms.